Whether he was involved in these groups or not, one thing that does stand out is that Copeland did not take any precautions to prevent being caught. He bought bomb-making material near his home and through the post delivered to his home. He kept the bombs at his home. He loitered around the bomb sites for considerable periods of time, being caught on dozens of cameras. He transported the bombs in public taxis. He even wore a very distinctive white baseball cap, which he bought just before his bombing campaign. Was this done deliberately to make him easy to spot? When the police first arrested him, he admitted to all 3 bombings and stated, "They're all down to me, I did them on my own." Then in a police interview stated, "I wanted to get caught." The obvious question which arises is, was he a patsy? 2 further observations which lend weight to Copeland being helped is firstly the amount of money he spent on the explosives was not readily available to him, and secondly he was not considered capable of changing a fuse, never mind successfully making and detonating bombs. In my opinion, somebody or some group may have manipulated him, or at the very least were monitoring him and knew what he was going to do, but took measures, probably with the help of the state, not to be identified themselves. There is also the possibility that he was a mind control victim, something I have covered extensively in interviews with Neil Sanders. In his confession statement he said, "I don't feel sad about it. I was just like a robot. I just felt nothing." Reading between the lines, MI5 and Special Branch were running an operation involving Copeland, but police and the anti-terror squad were probably not privy to it. It's been suggested that a rift between the 2 camps arose because of this, essentially a rift between MI5 and the police. Here is an article from The Guardian dated July 2000. There have been several persistent rumours the police had Copeland under surveillance before the Soho blast and lost him. Scotland Yard last night dismissed this as absolutely untrue. Other speculation has suggested there was friction between MI5 and Scotland Yard and that the 2 clashed over risk assessment. This too has been strongly denied. Hang on, nobody suggested the police were surveilling him. It was Special Branch and possibly MI5 that was surveilling him. The 2 clashed over risk assessment, meaning Scotland Yard considered Copeland a risk and wanted to arrest him, but MI5 didn't consider him a risk and wanted to observe him. It's easy to see why there may have been friction, as The Guardian put it, between MI5 and the police. I repeat that it took a staggering 12 days to get the CCTV image of him from the Brixton site and put it in a newspaper, during which time he detonated 2 further bombs, injuring dozens and killing 3. The 2 subsequent bombings could easily have been prevented if the police had done their job.
I was devastated because we'd released the images on the Thursday. We were actively following lots of information that had come through, and we'd not succeeded in arresting him before he committed his next offence.
Let's now come on to Crime Watch and Jill Dando's involvement in the London nail bomber case. Just to remind those who aren't familiar, Crime Watch was a very popular BBC National UK TV programme whose purpose was to assist the police via public telephone appeals in solving crimes, and Jill Dando was one of the 2 main presenters. The timing of this particular TV programme is of great importance. As you will recall, the first bomb went off in Brixton on Saturday the 17th of April 1999. Crime Watch was a monthly programme and just so happened to be being aired on the 20th of April, just 3 days after the bombing. As part of my investigations, I have met and spoken to the Crime Watch studio director who directed that particular programme on the 20th of April. His name is Peter Morpurgo. I'll come on to that meeting I had with him later in the film, but he told me that the Crime Watch team would usually spend the day before the show airs, in this case Monday the 19th, rehearsing for the Tuesday night show. So to feature an appeal for the Brixton bomb, which only happened late on Saturday the 17th, was fairly short notice. A decision must have been made by the police quite quickly to use Crime Watch for an appeal. and I also suspect that MI5 may have been out of the loop when this decision was made. Incidentally, this particular programme was Jill Dando's last appearance, and she was dead less than 6 days later. I'm going to show you the entire Crime Watch segment that features the Brixton bombing. But first, I want to home in on one very important statement coming from a member of the public. This is towards the end of the show, and Jill is reading out telephone responses from witnesses.
Well, following up with what Nick said earlier about the Brixton calls, several calls on that, some very good ones. Some people were seen on a roof in Brixton on the day with binoculars, but obviously we don't know whether they were connected or not.
The claim of people being on a rooftop was repeated in a BBC article dated the 21st of April. It states, one caller reported people equipped with binoculars on a rooftop. As we saw earlier, Copeland was being observed and filmed before the Soho bombing and likely also before and after the Brick Lane bombing. The statement from this witness, however, suggests he was probably being watched, as it was stated, with binoculars, also on the day of his first bomb, the Brixton bomb. In order to investigate the claims of people on the roof with binoculars, I went to the Brixton bomb site to see if I could identify where such people may have been situated. Note that the buildings in that area have not changed since the events, so it was fairly easy to identify where any operatives may have been situated. Okay, so I'm here in Brixton, and this is the spot of the first nail bomb allegedly planted by David Copeland. Now, as we saw in the Crime Watch UK programme, Jill Dando said that there were people on the roof with binoculars, presumably with oversight of the bomb site. Okay, now I've had a good look around the rooftops here, so I'm just going to do a 360. There's not really anywhere there. And really, I can only identify one place where they may have been, and it's just over my shoulder here on this rooftop. All of the rooftops on the other side of the road are sloped, so you wouldn't be able to stand on them. There is a rooftop above the tube station, but that doesn't have oversight. So my guess would be one of these rooftops here. You can see there's not many rooftops got visibility of this. I pan round.
Well, you know, just another day in Brixton.
Just another day in Brixton, he said. And yeah, I would say my money's on that building there. Of course, this one wouldn't have any visibility of the events. We've got a roof here. So this roof would obscure any view from that building, so it must have been on this side. Yep. Right. So there's a ledge here. Right. Okay. Wait, I'm going to put the camera down. So, I managed to get onto the roof of the shops of Electric Avenue. So here I am, I'm on the rooftop at Electric Avenue, and as you can see over my shoulder is Iceland. Perfect vantage point for whoever was involved to watch with binoculars the man in the white baseball cap. I'll go a little bit further to the back where these statues are. I'll just turn the camera around now. I'd be interested to know when these metal statues of these dogs was put up. Isn't it strange that one of them is looking right at the site where the bomb went off? Okay, I've got to climb down now. So if I can get up here, it's not beyond the wit of some intelligent agent, is it? The vegetable stall behind me, I just asked the guy, I said to him, how long has he had the stall? He said 86 years, so that's obviously his family. And I asked him when the monument of the dogs was put on the top of that building. He says about 4 or 5 years ago, so they're quite recent. Great, the sun's coming out. One thing before I forget, one of the traders said that to get up onto that roof, when they're doing maintenance and that kind of thing, they just come with a very long ladder. So you don't have to go through to the back of a shop to get on that roof. All you need is a very long ladder. And there are a few points where you could feasibly put that ladder without it being in front of the shop. So you go around the side and get up onto that roof. And another one of the traders in the shops said that he thought there used to be access to the roof, like metal steps or something like that, but that's not there now. So you either need a ladder, as it is now, you either need a ladder or to go through one of the shops. Okay, I'm still in Brixton and I've got the address of one of the witnesses. This is Gary Shilling, who moved the bag that had been left by Copeland before it went off. I just spoke to a market trader there and he said that they weren't right at the site, but they were in a nearby pub and they heard the windows shake. And he said, oh yeah, he was checking to see if there was anything in it worth nicking. That's what the market trader said, but I think he was just saying that as a joke. I'm gonna walk down to Electric Avenue. So I'm back in my low-budget hotel room, but today I've been all over London. I've been to the 3 nail bomb sites. I then went to where Jill Dando used to live, and I filmed in her street there in Fulham. So I'm absolutely wrecked. My ankles are killing, but it's been a really successful day. We know the police had CCTV images of Copeland on the 19th of April, which was the day before the Crime Watch show aired. But a decision was made by someone not to release these images until the 29th of April. Therefore, no image of him was shown on the TV show Appeal, but I would argue could have been. Let's now watch the Crime Watch appeal in its entirety, bearing in mind what we now know about the controversy surrounding these bombings, and that MI5 and Special Branch were probably against putting this appeal out, for the reasons I have explained previously.
Britain's most important unsolved cases. Now live, you can help solve them.
The homemade bomb that exploded in South London on Saturday seems to have been an act of lunacy. It wasn't the IRA. And though an anonymous phone call claimed it was a tiny fascist group, there's no evidence for that. And in any case, who would want to hurt, young and old, even this baby? Black and white, shoppers and market traders. Anyone, in fact, with the randomness of an exploding bag of nails. But tonight, you can help, and this is how. This is the quantity of nails packed around the explosives. There are between 6 and 10 pounds in weight here, and believe me, that's a fairly hefty bulk of nails. They're all round nails, and they range from this size to this. Now, who bought them? If you work in a hardware merchant's or in a DIY store, think back over the last few weeks. Who bought this lot? Who isn't a regular customer, isn't a regular builder? Who came in for this sort of quantity of nails? Or alternatively, did you sell a bag like this? Now, I know these things are fairly common, but this one is fairly new. And see if you can connect this and selling this to something else that we're about to tell you. Alan Fry is head of the anti-terrorist branch. Alan, a lot of publicity you've had for this already. What more can people do?
Police are anxious to talk to anybody who was in the Brixton Road, by the bus stops, by Electric Avenue, at about 5 o'clock last Saturday. Whether they were just walking past, shopping, waiting for a bus, or even on a bus.
That could be thousands of people, literally.
I appreciate that, but any one of them, maybe unwittingly, has the vital key to this investigation.
Even if they don't think they saw anything particular?
Yes, let us be the decider.
OK, now, if this was a small extremist group, by their nature, these little bands of people tend to have an awful lot of leaks, as it were. An awful lot of people tend to hear what's going on.
Yes, and almost certainly someone's heard them planning, someone's been party to that planning. They may have disagreed with the plan. This may be a renegade. What I would ask is for anyone in that position with any knowledge to talk to us in confidence.
Of course, what seems quite likely in this is it's a loner with a grudge.
Well, it could be a loner, it could be someone, have you seen someone acting suspiciously, out of character? Indeed, do you know of someone who has purchased a large number of nails? They may have been seen with a sports bag, which itself is out of character. More importantly, do you know someone who has literature on the makings of bombs? Have they boasted about making bombs? Do they experiment with explosives?
Do you think whoever did this will have tried to detonate something like it before?
I think that is certain. We have to act within the law, within data protection, and I think we sometimes have an expectation of the tentacles of the security service which are far wider than their actual role, their actual scope and their ability.
OK, well, if there's any way that you think you can help, please do. There's a £10,000 reward, that may go up. We've had an astonishing response on the Brixton nail bomb attack. We've learned that great samples of nails and sometimes great boxes are available at several stores, some of which have CCTV cameras in them. We've learned that in building sites often all the nails are kept together, so maybe somebody who did this is involved with a building site. And there is an extraordinary call here, someone saying that they saw people acting very suspiciously indeed, and we'll tell you a little more about that once we've cleared that later on. The phones are under siege at the moment. On the Brixton nail bomb, we've really had some fascinating calls. As I said earlier, we've got people who were in the area, a couple of very interesting calls, which I really can't give you anything more about at the moment. We've had about 60...
Well, following up with what Nick said earlier about the...
In body language studies, this gesture is the brain's attempt to block out deceit, doubt, or a lie that it sees. Women use a small, gentle rubbing motion just below the eye, either because they have been brought up to avoid making robust gestures or to avoid smudging makeup.
Brixton calls, several calls on that, some very good ones. Some people were seen on a roof in Brixton on the day with binoculars, but obviously we don't know whether they were connected or not.
Standing next to Jill is Chief Superintendent David Hatcher. Watch his body language when Jill talks about the people on the roof with binoculars. He knows he's on camera, so he's trying to look nonchalant, but the way he moves suddenly and takes his glasses off to look around the studio suggests to me he is not comfortable with Jill saying this, as if to check whether permission was granted.
Brixton calls, several calls on that, some very good ones. Some people were seen on a roof in Brixton on the day with binoculars, but obviously we don't know whether they were connected or not. Many calls giving us details about where the nails can be bought, centering on pound shops, so we don't really want any more calls on that. On the murder of a Swedish tourist, well, we had one...
Perhaps Scotland Yard or the anti-terror squad, who were involved in making this programme, were upset at having their hands tied by MI5 and thought they would allow some beans to be spilled about MI5's covert operation. In my research into this case, I have tried to get access to the Crime Watch Update report. This is a short update that normally follows the main Crime Watch programme, informing viewers of any progress about the cases discussed. I offered to pay the BBC whatever price was required just to be able to view the update as part of my research. Not necessarily to use it in this film, but just for me to view it. And they replied, Hi Richard, I'm afraid we can't help with your request. We cannot supply copies of BBC programmes footage to members of the public or companies for research, education or personal use, I'm afraid. Isn't it a disgrace that a publicly funded organisation like the BBC will not allow me just to view an old programme, never mind include it in my film, which I know they have a copy of because I have met the Crime Watch studio director, Peter Morpurgo, who told me they were archived on 1-inch tape. I'd be very interested to watch the Crime Watch update from the 20th of April 99. If anyone has a copy of it on a VHS tape in their loft, please get in touch. When I first started looking into the Dando murder, I reasoned like this. There's very little in Dando's character or background that suggests she had any enemies. She's like a female version of Alan Titchmarsh. No one would murder Alan Titchmarsh. I felt it was highly likely, therefore, that the reason for her sudden murder was linked in some way to her role on Crime Watch. Her murder seemed to me as though it had been planned and carried out at very short notice. The fact it was a daylight shooting on a London street suggests that there was not enough time to plan a more sophisticated operation. So let's take a look at it. Most commentators agree the murder was professionally executed. Jill was living most of the time at her fiancé's house with Alan Farthing in Chiswick, 3 miles from her own house, but would occasionally pop home to retrieve faxes and other things. She was returning to her home by car shortly after 11:30 a.m. on Monday morning. She parked in the street and as she was putting her key in the door was approached from behind, forced down to the ground so that her head nearly touched the tiled step before a 9mm caliber pistol was pressed against her temple and fired, the bullet having been crimped to reduce the noise of the blast. Analysis of the wound and the scene revealed the murder was quick and drew little initial attention from the public. Her body lying at the front door for 14 minutes before being discovered gave the perpetrator plenty of time to run off up the street, heading west towards Fulham Palace Road. The killer was seen by 2 of her neighbours leaving the scene, but at that time neither realised he had just killed Jill. From these witnesses, he was wearing a dark brown thigh-length jacket, was mid to late 30s, had collar-length thick black hair, was white, around 5'10". Richard Hughes, who saw the killer's face, said the killer was thick-set like a rugby player or a soldier, had a jowly face and looked like TV presenter Bob Mills. Immediately after this, there are numerous sightings of a man running down Fulham Palace Road, then a sighting of a man running into the park, then of a man wearing a dark thigh-length coat in the park, acting oddly. Finally, a man was seen coming out of the park who then stood at a bus stop on Fulham Palace Road. He was sweating a lot and out of breath, as if he had been running. However, the man at the bus stop was wearing a suit, not a thigh-length jacket, and had dark hair but shorter hair than was seen by the first 2 witnesses. He did not get on the bus with the other passengers when it arrived at 11:45 a.m, but waited 1 minute and got on the next one and paid to go to Putney Station. He was not seen getting off that bus at Putney Station with all the other passengers, so must have got off earlier. Around this time, a metallic blue Range Rover was seen on CCTV speeding out of Doneraile Street. It is possible he was picked up by the Range Rover. One of the journalists to report from the scene was this man, who you might recognise from my Madeleine McCann films.
Jill was killed, as you say, by a single gunshot to the head, and that she died of a brain injury caused by a single bullet. There had been concern mid-afternoon after reports that a man had been seen acting suspiciously on Putney Bridge, quite close to here, whether or not he jumped into the Thames, as one report said.
It seems it's a small world when it comes to government cover-ups. One of the eyewitnesses, who got a very close view of the man at the bus stop, drew up this e-fit. He described the suspect as slightly foreign-looking. The e-fit might be the killer, but there is considerable doubt about this, because this man was wearing a suit, not a dark brown thigh-length jacket, and had shorter hair. But for now, I want to stay on the possibility that the Crime Watch TV programme is linked to the motive.
Well, dramatic developments tonight after a post-mortem examination showed that Jill Dando died from a brain injury caused by a single bullet wound to the head. It does seem increasingly likely tonight that this could be the work of a professional hitman, though Scotland Yard are refusing to comment on that theory. But it does seem tonight that Jill Dando's high-profile role presenting a national crime programme could be connected with her murder. Certainly the post-mortem result does suggest that a hitman could be responsible. So far, the weapon that he used hasn't been found.
When I decided to study this case, I discussed it with an associate of mine, and I suggested that we should watch the Crime Watch programmes which aired immediately before her murder to see if any of the many cases covered in the programmes might provide a clue to the motive for her death. It was my associate that highlighted to me the Copeland story, and once we appreciated the full truth about that story, largely by looking at Larry O'Hara's investigation, and then compared the timing of the case with the timing of Jill Dando's murder, a clear motive emerged. From these Crime Watch clips, I think it is possible that Dando was privy to sensitive information within the Brixton bombing investigation, which was not aired on television. We know the CCTV image of Copeland was available the day before this show on the 19th of April. Did she see that image in the rehearsal because the police wanted to air it in their appeal but were prevented from showing it by MI5? Did Dando learn the name of David Copeland as being the main suspect as a result of either information from members of the public phoning the show or intelligence given to her by the police? Was the phone call police recorded alleging to be the bomber actually made by David Copeland, and had Dando heard that call? If she did learn information about the identity of the bomber 9 days before they released his photograph, which was also 4 days before the second bomb was due to be placed, and a full 10 days before the Soho bomb was due to be placed, would that not mean she was in possession of very sensitive information? Information that somebody could not afford to be made public? Let's also point out that the day after Jill was murdered, she was due to read the national 6 o'clock news live on television. I am not suggesting that she would have blurted out what she knew about David Copeland live on the news. I am just drawing your attention to the fact that she had a very high profile in the media and had numerous platforms available to her to put out information, even if she needed to put it out through a third party. Let's take a look at the timeline of events incorporating the Dando murder and the nail bombings. Saturday the 17th of April, Brixton bomb detonated, probably being observed by Special Branch and MI5. Tuesday the 20th of April, Crime Watch appeal, which received very good information, Jill Dando possibly gleaning information about the identity of the bomber. Saturday the 24th of April, Brick Lane bomb detonated. Monday the 26th of April, Jill Dando murdered. Thursday the 29th of April, Copeland's photograph appears in the media. Friday the 30th of April, Soho bomb detonated, killing 3. Saturday the 1st of May at 1:20 a.m, Copeland arrested and admits to all 3 bombs. If Dando was murdered because of what she found out about David Copeland, it took 5 days to authorise the hit, find a suitable hitman or team, then plan and execute the assassination. That time frame, 5 days, seems quite plausible to me. Now, once you've realised this potential motive for Jill Dando's murder, and we are going to look at other motives, you might ask the question, assuming this was the motive, why didn't they kill Nick Ross too? Or indeed some of the other police officer presenters who might have known the same information? Firstly, the other presenters and people behind the scenes do not have Jill Dando's media profile. They do not read the 6 o'clock news and have probably all signed the Official Secrets Act and may have been firmly reminded of this after that particular show. They do not have access to a live media platform. Secondly, let's come on to the very interesting character, Jill's co-presenter, Nick Ross. There are several things to point out about Ross. He studied at Belfast University in the late 1960s, where he became interested in the sectarian issues and was a student activist.
For no particularly good reason, I found myself elected to represent the halls of residence here at the Student Union. And this now rather grubby-looking building, then brand new, was about to become the cockpit of political dissension. This parochial eating and meeting place was soon to find itself at the heart of events that would reverberate around the world.
Then, soon after university, started his career as a newsreader for the BBC in Northern Ireland. He has been involved in current affairs shows covering crime, the law and issues like drug addiction, and in 1998 made a prominent documentary broadcast by the BBC called We Shall Overcome, which covered the political power struggle in Northern Ireland. Ross comes across as being sympathetic to the nationalist Republicans and supporting their need for civil rights, but stops short at saying Northern Ireland should be made part of the Republic. Ross appeases the Republicans, but without agreeing with their ultimate cause.
When I came over here, very quickly my sympathies were allied to the nationalist population. It seemed that they were discriminated against. They were second-class citizens. Was I wrong? I was despairing of the Catholic tendency to lapse into a romanticised nationalism that causes people to get killed.
Thousands of people on both sides have died in this war, and I think any balanced observer would agree that the BBC did not present and does not present the Northern Ireland issue in a balanced way. It is pro-UK, pro the British monarchy, pro keeping Northern Ireland part of the UK. So I would suggest that one of the BBC's key frontmen, who has covered this issue in detail, would probably be an asset of MI5. I suspect Nick Ross may have been made an agent of the state decades before his involvement in Crime Watch, possibly when he was a student. Therefore, in my view, he's not the sort of person likely to give away state secrets. A safe pair of hands, you might say. Jill Dando, however, presented holiday programmes, sipping martini in the sun, and is far less likely in her past life to have been recruited by the secret state. Another important point to bear in mind about Ross is that he campaigned vigorously against Barry George, who I will come on to, the man who was wrongly convicted of Jill Dando's murder and spent 8 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. In 2016, Ross said,
I thought that the evidence against him was very compelling indeed, as long as you think of evidence not in the way that an English court thinks of evidence.
Exactly. Overwhelming mass of circumstantial
overwhelming evidence of things where the arrows pointed at his guilt.
Nick Ross implies in this interview that he still believes Barry George is guilty. This is a strange stance for somebody who claims to be interested in truth and justice. The question arises, does Nick Ross know more about the Jill Dando murder than he lets on? And does he know whether the state had any involvement? I'm going to look at some quotes by Nick Ross and an audio interview he gave in 2016. Viewers may know that in the past I have commissioned the work of Peter Hyatt, a US-based expert in analysing people's statements for deception and also for ascertaining why people are lying and what they are lying about. Something that Peter regularly points out is that if somebody makes a statement containing a negative assertion when they have not been prompted for that information, then we must be on high alert for deception. As Bill Clinton once said, I did not have sexual relations with that woman. I have had a short quote which Nick Ross made on the day of Jill's murder analysed by Peter Hyatt, and he has also analysed a lengthy audio interview that Ross gave in 2016. Before I look at Peter's analysis, here is an article written by Nick Ross in the Daily Mail, staggeringly the very next day after Jill's murder. Jill's murder became public on the afternoon of the 26th, and he writes a detailed article in time for publication the following morning. He must have written this on the day Jill was murdered. The article speaks of her long legs and having a figure to die for. Then another article is published the same day in the Evening Standard, poignantly titled, Nick Ross, I don't think Crime Watch is the link. How the hell would he know that? The fact he makes this negative assertion suggests to me that not only is Crime Watch probably the link, but that he knows Crime Watch is probably the link. So here is a direct quote from that article made on the day of the murder, which has been analysed by Peter Hyatt. There has been no indication that Crime Watch or any other programme would put a presenter at threat. There has never been any sort of threat received by Crime Watch. I think everybody is grasping at straws. We hate the ambiguity and want to know what happened. I don't just think it is premature, I think it is daft to look for Crime Watch connections, except as one of 100 other things that have to be looked at. I will present Peter's analysis of this statement in the next part of the film, along with his analysis of Nick Ross's 2016 audio interview.